The jump off point for that was we spent a lot of time talking to Jesse and the Kweza team about the flavor profile and the texture profile of sorghum in finished beer, and trying to make sure that we can find something that will bridge the gap very comfortably between the traditional kind of palate and flavor of sorghum brewing and Western kind of Euro-American flavor palettes and what we expect in modern craft beers, certainly in European style craft beers. So we looked at two major things. There was an ever so slight tartness present in quite a lot of sorghum beers. And Jesse mentioned this earlier, because sorghum reacts differently to barley, it doesn't have the gluten strains. It gives a thinner kind of textural experience to a beer. And certainly with the last 10 years or so of American-led European-style brewing, texture is hugely important, especially in a lot of modern hop-forward beers. And then you go back into traditional European brewing, into Belgian brewing, German brewing, English brewing as well. The texture of the beer is almost as important as the flavor. So we spent quite a bit of time going through like our hop science over the last few years to try and find something that could fill in a couple of those gaps as well, to try and create a hop bundle, as we're calling it, to make that final product feel a bit more natural to someone that maybe isn't used to drinking sorghum beers. And we settled on 3 varieties, which, when used together, give a really quite wide variety of styles that can be brewed with them. They're great kind of agronomical varieties as well, which is a big thing for us, obviously, with the biodiversity angle of sorghum brewing itself. It's something that's incredibly important to us at YCH. So we wanted to try and find some interesting varieties that are incredibly agronomically strong and work really, really well in final brewing. So the 3 varieties we settled on, one is Sabro, which is it's a relatively recent variety into the global brewing scene. It was only kind of released like 4 or 5 years ago now. But the thing that Sabro brings to the table is a perceived sweetness. It's from a Neo-Mexicanus genome, which is from wild hops, effectively. So it's a domesticated cultivar of wild hops, and it has an incredible, almost creamy texture that it brings into the beer. It's a very strange, it's a strange thing to try and explain, unless people are very familiar with Sabro. I absolutely love it. Can be a little bit of a divisive hop for some people. I think it's absolutely fantastic. But it has this incredible perceived sweetness to it. We've also gone with Idaho 7, which is a hop that's been only kind of readily available globally for 2 or 3 years, developed by a guy called Nate Jackson and Jackson Hop in Idaho, hence Idaho 7. But it's another one which has absolutely huge oil quantity for the hops as well. So we kind of look at the breakdown in oil quantities and the makeup of that oil quantity as well. So Idaho 7 is hugely packed with myrcene as the primary bulk of the hop oil constitute of Idaho 7, which gives a lot of really nice like tropical, almost like lemongrassy mango kind of high tones in there as well, along with a lovely kind of almost like leafy earthiness in there as well. So it's something that kind of fills in a lot of the gaps that people would kind of expect to see in there. And the last one we went for was Equinox, which it's been around for quite a while. But what we've specifically gone for with Equinox is the cryo hops version of Equinox. So cryo hops is a process that YCH came up with about 4 or 5 years ago now, which is a process that takes the hops, effectively drops them down to sub-zero temperatures in a nitrogen environment, slowly crushes the hops to remove the leaf matter, and leaves us with just a pure resin pellet at the end of it. Equinox in its cone form has a really kind of bright phenolic, not phenolic, sorry, like a polyphenolic greenness to it as well, which is absolutely wonderful. But when you take it into its cryo format, it really enhances the tropical fruit flavor of it as well. The thing that I get from Equinox Cryo mostly is dry papaya, and with some of the flavors that Jesse and the team have been brewing with as well, some of the flavor pickups on there very much a tropical fruit led hop variety. Just picks up nicely, and it's another one that has an absolutely huge residual oil quantity in there as well, which just leaves perceived texture to a beer as well. It's been some of these high oil or high residual oil and high perceived residual sweetness hops have been kind of the secret to a lot of the New England IPA brewing over the last like 5 or 6 years. It's how you get that huge textural silky mouthfeel into it. So we wanted to try and take some of what's been very much the cutting edge of hop science and brewing science in the States for the last 10 years or so, and kind of put some of that into the thought process of traditional brewing. And we think we've come up with a really nice kind of harmonious blend of hops that actually benefits from both the flavor profiles and also some of the perceived shortfalls of sorghum in brewing when you're looking at it through the eyes of kind of modern European brewing, at least.
Right. So these are designed to be, like I said, to be able to produce what would be considered a modern beer. This is not an attempt to get brewers making a traditional beer as such. It's to bring that into a modern palate, is it?
Yeah, we've tried to bridge that gap a little bit, because the jump, some people have been absolutely wild about the idea of, okay, let's brew something incredibly traditional, let's go with as classic a version of this as we can do, and that's absolutely wonderful. But for a lot of people, and I think a lot of people's end consumers, that might be a little bit too much of a jump. So we've tried to come at this project as a mid gap, a kind of an introduction to what sorghum can do. The idea of brewing something that's completely gluten-free to people that have no celiac tendencies, it can potentially be an off-put. The idea of brewing with something that people are not familiar with can potentially be an off-put. So we've tried to come up with something that will allow people to either brew something very traditional if they want to. I know that Jesse and the team actually brewed with some of these hops in a much more traditional way as well. But equally, to try and find something that most brewers around the world could say, okay, I understand this portion of it, and this will help me to kind of implement this portion of it as well. And equally to kind of ease that in with their end consumers as well.
Right. So yeah, so that makes sense. It's yeah, like you said, it's to make it easy for the brewers, but also make it easy for them to sell, I guess, at the end of the day. That there's no point brewing a traditional beer if nobody else will drink it for you.
Yeah, and the hope is that people will enjoy these beers, and they'll further kind of experiment with sorghum brewing and things like that as well. I think if you've had a good experience with something within a sphere that you understand, you're much more likely to go in with 2 feet there afterwards, and that's kind of what we're hoping to achieve through this.
Yeah, well, that kind of matches with, I think, a lot of craft beer drinkers are doing. Like, they start off with the very hoppy ones, and then like saisons and all lambic sours are becoming more popular because the palates just kind of, you know, kind of change over time. So these hops then are, when you're expecting people to take part, from what Steve was saying as well, it sounds like you don't expect them to be brewing all sorghum beers. You're expecting them to be maybe using 20% sorghum as a start to kind of get their feet wet on that. Is that right?
Yeah, we've done a few recipes, again, like in collaboration with Kweza, with this of here's some suggested ideas. Here's, if you're completely unfamiliar with sorghum as a grain or an extract, or kind of whatever the format that is available in their region, we've come up with some recipes as some guidance. But equally, there's a couple of people on the first round that were just like, no, we'd like to brew something in a very much in the style of how we normally brew. And equally, people that are just like, well, no, we'd love to brew something in the style how Kweza and some of the African brewers brew as well. So it really is open to interpretation, I think. But the idea is to really kind of highlight that there is this incredible grain that a lot of people don't really know about. There's a lot more to brewing out there than barley and wheat. And yeah, it's kind of it isn't just a gluten-free grain. It can be a really interesting flavor, like thing to throw into your flavor palette as well. And yeah, trying to kind of open that visibility piece a little bit.